Değerli konuklar, hoş geldiniz. VitrA olarak bugün sizi İngiliz Kraliyet Mimarlar Enstitüsü RIBA işbirliği ile Eylül 2018'den bu yana düzenlediğimiz Mimar Sohbetlerinin 25.sinde ağırlıyoruz. Türkiye'den doğan VitrA markası bugün ürünleriyle 75'ten fazla ülkeye ulaşıyor. Ülkemizin seramik mirasını ve banyo kültürünü tasarım ve inovasyon gücümüzle harmanladığımız 60 yılı aşkın deneyime sahibiz. Banyoda ihtiyaç duyulan tüm ürünleri tasarlama yetkinliğimizle sağlıklı bir yaşam için ürün ve çözümler geliştiriyoruz. Bir yandan da aynı ufku paylaştığımız mimarlık ekosisteminin gelişimine katkıda bulunacak çalışmalar yapıyoruz. Bu kapsamda kimi zaman bugün olduğu gibi değerli projelerin ortağı oluyoruz, kimi zaman da kendi projelerimizi tasarlayarak mimarlık kültürünü destekliyoruz. Yalnız Türkiye'de değil, aktif olarak yer aldığımız pazarlarda da sektör profesyonelleriyle diyalog kurmamızı sağlayan çalışmaları önemsiyoruz. RIBA örneğinde olduğu gibi farklı ülkelerde işbirlikleri yapıyoruz. Örneğin Venedik Mimarlık Bienali Uluslararası Mimarlık Sergisi'ndeki Türkiye pavyonunun eş sponsorlarından biriyiz. Değerli izleyiciler, mimar dostlarımızın yaratıcılığını destekleyecek, hayal ettikleri banyoları hayata geçirmelerini sağlayacak tasarımlar üretmek için çalışıyoruz. Çünkü sağlıklı bir yaşamın ancak iyi banyo ürünleriyle mümkün olduğunu biliyoruz. Çünkü iyi mimarlık uygulamalarının yaşam kalitemizi arttıracağına inanıyoruz. Daha iyi bir gelecek için hepinize teşekkür ederiz.
Thank you. Welcome again from us all here, and thank you for joining us for this digital talk as part of our prestigious RIBA VitrA Talk series. We're very happy to be sharing this talk with you all today. My name is Chloe Spivey-Lowe, and I work at the Royal Institute of British Architects in London as the Public Programmes Manager, where I lead on programming and delivering the RIBA's public talks and events. The RIBA is a global professional body driving excellence in architecture. We support our members and society to deliver better buildings and places, strong communities, and a sustainable environment. We have over 47,000 members across the world, and nearly 6,000 of them are based outside of the UK. If you're interested in joining, we have varying membership options, including joining as a RIBA affiliate member or as a RIBA chartered member. So if you are interested, I would advise you to find out more via our website. The RIBA is unique in being both a membership body and an accredited public museum. We have over 4 million items in our British Architectural Library, which will remain free and open to everyone once the building reopens. We use our collections to curate a number of free exhibitions across the year, alongside commissioning new displays and installations by architects and designers, who provide a contemporary response to our historic material. The RIBA plus VitrA Talk series sits as part of our public offer to architects and society, providing a platform to hear lectures by emerging and established architects from across the world. Since 2018, we've hosted talks in our headquarters in London, elsewhere across the UK, and also, of course, in Istanbul. Many of our talks are also available to watch back online via the RIBA's YouTube channel. We have a dedicated RIBA plus VitrA YouTube playlist, so I do encourage you to watch them. The series was launched back in September 2018 with a lecture by Kazuya Sejima of Sana, and since then we have brought talks by 47 speakers from 14 different countries to a combined audience of over 100,000 people. Since the pandemic has halted in-person events, we have worked hard to provide the talks in a high-quality digital format instead, and since last year have delivered 7 digital talks in this series. Of course, another impact of the pandemic is that it has become impossible for us to travel and bring these talks to you all in Istanbul. Here's just a quick recap of the previous talks in this Istanbul series. Firstly, we had an amazingly successful lecture with Daniel Libeskind back in April 2019. Then last year in early March, we continued with an inspiring lecture by Ben Van Berkel of UN Studio. We will be joined shortly by Kent Jackson, design partner of SOM, and we feel incredibly lucky and honoured that Kent has been able to share this time with us for his exciting talk. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill is one of the leading architecture and interior design, engineering and urban planning firms in the world. Since its founding more than 80 years ago, SOM has earned a reputation for design and excellence with a portfolio that includes some of the most important architectural accomplishments of the 20th and 21st centuries, and has been a leader in the research and development of specialized technologies, new processes, and innovative ideas, many of which have had a palpable and lasting impact on the design profession and the physical environment. Kent Jackson has been with SOM for 24 years, and in that time has worked on projects vastly varying in scale and use, including corporate offices, airports, residential developments, and large mixed-use urban schemes. Kent currently leads a team developing innovative approaches to design. He's a global ambassador to the World Green Building Council 2020 campaign and actively advocates for the decarbonisation of the built environment. His recent projects include the JTI headquarters in Geneva and the Stratford in London, some of which I think he'll be showing us shortly. So on that note, and without further delay, I'm very happy to welcome and hand over to Kent Jackson.
Well, thank you, Chloe. And I also want to extend my thanks to the RIBA and VitrA for setting up these talks. They've been great, and I'm glad to be very much part of that. As part of the RIBA and VitrA talks, I was asked to reflect on my journey as an architect. And I believe we're all shaped from our childhood to some extent or another. And I'm from a very northwest corner of the United States, a place that happens to be called Cape Disappointment. I'll explain that a little bit, but it's where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean. And in its very beginning, when it was first founded, it was an area known to be rich in the fur trade, but impossible for the explorers to locate, leaving them empty-handed, and hence it came up with the name of Cape Disappointment. Being from such a location, I was fortunate enough to spend most of my summers on the ocean. Growing up, I didn't find that unusual, but it was only later that I realized that my experience was incredibly unique. Two fundamental things shaped me as an architect and my approach to architecture. And these really developed over time, and now I can rate them back to my early understandings of my surrounding. Quite early on, I became aware how everything was interconnected in understanding the ecosystems that surrounded me. This is an image of the Columbia River today, and there are still parts of the river that look very much similar of how the first explorers would have seen it. But things were changing quite dramatically as I was growing up, and I didn't quite realize it at the time, but it's something I, again, have now been able to look back onto and wonder how we interface with the planet, and it's made me be a little bit more critical in the way in which we look at things. The Columbia River watershed spans 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces. The Columbia River is also the largest river that enters into the Pacific Ocean. It was a river that saw an advancement in post-war American growth. And I realized that this 2,000-kilometer river, starting all the way in Canada, had a direct relationship and an immediate impact on the surrounding area where I was raised. That community was largely based around fishing, more specifically the salmon fishing. And however, over time, and the industry really dwindled away. Today, it's almost disappeared. The Columbia River has 14 dams along the length of the wider Columbia River watershed, and it has over 60 dams in total. These impressive man-made interventions were modernizing in the remote, unworkable land of hydroelectric power and irrigation, and supported all kinds of wider growth and opportunity. However, the dams interrupted the salmon life cycle, and although they helped support the new agricultural industry and its rapid growth, my hometown that was once a prosperous salmon industry suffered year upon year, and now the town's identity has slowly been lost over time. This made me realize and become acutely aware at a pretty early age that any changes we make to our environment and ecosystem have a direct set of consequences. I also realized that reversing the effect of these types of interventions is difficult, if not impossible, especially when the majority benefit and only a small minority suffer from it. This realization and relationship that we had with this river seemed in complete conflict with the time I spent on the ocean. I realized that the relationship that we had with the sea was in sharp contrast to the way we treated the land. The ocean has a power and a strength that we can harness, but we do not have the ability to control it completely. Being on the ocean day after day, you are far more aware of your vulnerability. And learning from this as an architect, I can see that as designers, we would all be in a better place if we were more aware of the impacts that we make, that the buildings that we design have a direct effect on the surrounding environment of our future generations. Not far inland from where I was raised, there was this building that I would really wait in anticipation to pass as we headed into the city. This building would have an impact over time on me, and it's called the Weyerhaeuser headquarters. It was a building that seemed to effortlessly bridge nature with the built environment and its city. And it was a building that we all could learn from, I think, with the responsibility that we have as designers. I, much later in life, learned that this was actually a project by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. So I joined SOM in 1994. And it wasn't a direct result of the Weyerhaeuser building or the headquarters. It was more about the types of projects that no one else seemed to be looking at, the projects that required difficult and complex answers to. And much like the Columbia River, the Great Lakes project bridges Canada with the United States. It was a project that we created rather than that we were commissioned for. Because we felt it was important and because we knew no one else was looking at this vital resource. The Great Lakes actually are responsible for 80% of North America's fresh water, and it's actually 20% of the world's fresh water. So by creating this binational park to help protect the natural resources of the fresh water, we also could address transport links and reinvigorate cities along the Rust Belt like Detroit and Cleveland and their Canadian counterparts. No firm really seemed to be looking at these types of complex problems at this scale and to a certain extent beyond our scope. And really, SOM is a collective of architects and designers and engineers and planners that are shaping a better future for our planet by combating climate change and accelerating our actions for a sustainable and low carbon future. Our founding partner, Nat Owings, wrote this book, The Spaces in Between, An Architect's Journey. And in this book, he wrote, "Civilizations leave marks on the earth by which they are known and judged. In large measure, the nature of their immortality is gauged by how well their builders made peace with the environment." I think this is really a timeless quote, and it's as relevant as today as when we published it in 1973. These projects of scale, for me, really moved me. And I look at the Hajj terminal in Jeddah. It was completed 40 years ago to meet the needs of the pilgrims of Mecca, and this seasonal event that millions of passengers were passing through in the terminal in just a 6-week period. 40 years later, this incredibly powerful project continues to embody the cultural and environmental sensitivities that marked it out. More recently, we have been exploring how to enable the terminal to be used year-round while continuing to achieve a wholly passive cooling strategy beneath the simplicity of these iconic tent structures. Also in Jeddah, the National Commerce Bank picks up on those same sensitivities. Today, it's more common to see glass towers emerging from the Middle East with very little awareness of their climate or their culture. Most recently, the Billie Jean King Library addresses the issues of embodied energy, built over and retaining the existing subterranean structure that enabled a lighter superstructure above. SOM responded with a tall, all-timber frame and fabricated off-site and rapidly assembled to create a striking public building and a generous series of interior spaces. The projects I just mentioned are exemplar, and they are the types of projects we all need to be doing because today we find ourselves at the tipping point for both planetary health and the pressures facing our population. And our industry historically has been a significant contributor to this. We now need to change the way we contribute and make peace with the environment. I'm going to share a series of statistics that maybe some of you have heard, but I still find them shocking no matter how many times I look at them. But 2.4 billion people will be added to the planet by 2050. And we think we know that the 80% of which will be living in cities. It would not be new news to say that most of our cities are planning to grow in the future, but it's really the rate in which they will grow. Cities have always been predicated on growth, but our cities have generally evolved as trends and pressures made them adapt slowly over time. Social housing, automobile, open spaces, those types of pressures. And at the rate and change to our cities, it places concerns if we can adapt enough to make these healthy environments for people to live. As our cities are densifying with 230 billion square meters to be constructed and or renovated in our cities worldwide, this would be the equivalent to adding Greater London to the planet every 2 months for the next 35 years. 90% of the buildings we will occupy by 2030 in Europe already exist today. In the UK, we are working to an even greater proportion of existing buildings. And it's important to point out that embodying energy and embodied carbon outweighs the operational carbon savings of building new. The National Trust for Historic Preservation study found that in many cases, replacing an older, less energy efficient home with a new high performance home will take an average of 40 to 50 years to offset the ecological impact of new construction. Global strategies to combat climate change focus on lowering our carbon emissions in the immediate future. And we don't have 40 to 50 years left to wait. Taking out the percentages and looking at this from a building stock, there are roughly 200 million buildings in Europe, and as many as 190 million will need to be renovated before 2050. The World Green Building Council also identifies that in the EU, real estate drives 50% of all raw material extraction. The reinvention of our existing built environment is essential to control this. This is a far greater and different ecosystem than the one I mentioned earlier in my hometown. Yet real estate is also the source of 18 million construction jobs across Europe, and we will need to better harness the important economic engine. The careful evaluation of our existing building stock and the decision to renovate versus build new is ever more pressing today. Our cities evolve as our societal priorities, interests, and pressures change. A good example of this could be our Denver Union Station Master Plan. The historic building was never really in jeopardy, but the surrounding area around it was, in turn challenging the viability of the station. The ability to revision in the station and the areas around it really show how the extension of life can give our buildings as well as our cities. This is no longer an area for people to move quickly through. This is a place for people now to stay and enjoy and to linger. We were commissioned to expand and transform the station into a major regional transportation hub, converting 20 acres of former railway yards into an urban transit district that accommodates light rail, commuter and intercity rail with bicycle, bus routes, and pedestrian pathways into an intermodal hub. One of the largest of its kind in the United States, the redevelopment of the former rail yards at Denver Union Station is a case study of the power of transit-oriented urban design. Sensitive to its location, the public investment catalyzed an unprecedented wave of investment back into the city. And it's projects I feel like these that should set the standard for 21st century intermodal hubs. Whereas in contrast to the scale we approached Denver, it perhaps is more subtle renovation that you see here, where we took the 100-year-old Strand movie theater in San Francisco and adapted it into an experimental performance space for the American Conservatory Theater. That better represents the more subtle transition of our fine-grained fabric that we will have to make in our cities. And it's these types of small changes that will allow a significant extension of life to our pre-existing building stock. By creating a civic theater that opens up to the street, it energizes both the building and the surrounding neighborhood. The Strand Theater, strategically located between the city's booming retail district and the civic center, is also in a fast-growing tech industry. And this restored theater represents a key component in the regeneration of this once vital part of the city. If we embrace the transformations that exist in our cities, the question is, can we look at transforming buildings that no longer fulfill their mission and integrate them back into our cities and our communities? This is the Farley Post Office in Midtown Manhattan. I believe this is a very poignant reflection of where we are today. The Farley Post Office once sat adjacent to the demolished Penn Station. It was this demolition of Penn Station in 1963 that initiated an international outcry and prompted the development of New York's architectural preservation movement. New York's original Penn Station came to symbolize lost grandeur of rail travel and public space in the United States after it was demolished. Fortunately, the Farley Post Office was spared, but the vast space in the center was lost as a post office mail sorting room during World War II. The new Moynihan train station hall reestablishes this sense of civic monumentality by evoking the vaulted concourse of the original Penn Station with revisioning of original atrium of the Farley Post Office building. It's truly an impressive civic space that celebrates a unique history of the Farley building, melding old with new, and the replaced skylights arch up from this massive original steel trusses of the building to create this internal public concourse. A life lesson is that we should be able to give back more than we take. I think this is equally true when we think of the buildings that we design. Every time we place a building on this planet, we must realize there's a consequence. We need to have a means to analyze and critique our building's impact. This has been a critical year for the human population, and we should now be able to realize that our environment is vital to our well-being. We also know that we are more connected with nature, and we are healthier for it and more productive for it. Our buildings should be responding to our needs more than they ever have done before. We were quite honored to be working with the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. The building was created after World War I as the Palace of Nations, and the United Nations wasn't established for another 20 years after World War II. As you could imagine, it's been an organization that went through significant growth and significant changes over the last 75 years. The strategic heritage plan that we undertook was a great opportunity for the building to adapt and to be tied closer to the UN's core mission. The UN community is all about the betterment of society and the planet, the need to be in constant dialogue with one another, and the need to have a close collaboration. Sadly, the building that the UN had grown up in over time no longer suited the way the UN required to work. It's uniquely situated on a sloping landscape that overlooks Lake Geneva. The UN has one of the most beautiful settings in Europe to look out onto, and astonishingly, for being such a beautiful setting, the collection of buildings didn't open up to the park, nor did its members venture out into its unrivaled landscape. The idea of opening the building up came with a series of challenges, as the Palace of Nations was rightfully a listed building, and any interventions we made to it needed to be carefully considered. Our solution was to create only a new structure where it was absolutely paramount, and otherwise take careful consideration to any adjustments and alterations to the existing building. As mentioned, the original Palais was designed over 85 years ago. It had the challenges of how we could change the way people were working in isolation with very few locations to meet their colleagues or to be able to collaborate. The other issue with the Palais is it had grown up organically over time, and depending on the UN needs, in so doing, it created a 1.5 kilometer network of corridor to connect all of the disparate parts of the building together. This left vast areas and corridors where people would bypass one another in order to get from one location to another. And in actual fact, there were quite significant spaces, both indoor and outdoor, that you should stop and be able to enjoy or be able to gather with your colleagues or have this moment of respite. But a majority of these spaces were endless corridors, like the image on the left, where there was no clarity in where you were going, or facilities or spaces that allowed you to use, share, or collaborate or engage with the outside world. We were able to take these long, dark, endless corridors and create moments where there could be communal gatherings areas, and altered the closed-off office environments to open up as hub and huddle spaces. We also needed to look at a series of their conference and meeting spaces to see if we could make them work harder without diminishing their performance and spatial quality. This is hugely challenging, but we were able in key locations to lift the entire floor up to provide more accommodation below. And as important as that was to acquire more space for the UN to be able to collaborate in, the raising up of that floor also created better visual links to outside. And this is where I find renovation and adaptive reuse projects so rewarding. A lot's changed in 85 years of how we once worked, and it would most likely be able to hinder us today if we were to work in those types of environments. The easy answer has always been to propose demolition after 85 years of the building and hindering the way we might work. But today there needs to be a shift in that mindset. The expression, the greenest building, is the one that's already been built. It needs to be the starting point for our analysis. There's a significant challenge working with existing buildings, but we need to rise to this occasion and no longer be in the mindset of demolishing and rebuilding. The strategic heritage plan that we have implemented was a great test for being able to evaluate how and when to renovate and when it's absolutely necessary to build new. Analyzing the needs and demands for the UN was a last resort. We found ourselves needing to add a building to accommodate all of the UN's 3,200 staff. Being in a pristine parkland setting with specific height limitations, we found solutions that would have the least impact to its setting. a way in which we could terrace and interlock the floor plates that allowed every floor to have a courtyard or a terrace, or in some instances, both. When you enter, the lobby brings everyone together and a location where you can be informal or have formal gatherings. This is the start of a sequence of landscape stairs that interconnect the different UN organizations together. And this is so important in what the UN does, this ability to get individuals, groups, departments, to have the chance to meet and share their thoughts with one another. SOM was able to bring its unique interdisciplinary approach to create low carbon, both in operational and embodied energy. These stairs that you see accentuate this predominantly timber building and act as a conduit for connecting people with their surrounding environment and the surrounding UN community. The workplace is complementary to the palais. However, it was possible to provide better daylight, more extensive views, and more connectivity to the parkland and the views back to Lake Geneva. And I think I should be clear here. No one said this was going to be easy when we're renovating and designing within a historic building. It is a completely different playbook with many of us have never been accustomed to working to. There are significant more challenges working with historic fabric, from whether it be code compliance, the energy demands, or the space provisions. With a new build, one would hope that we could create better daylight, views, and connectivity. And this says to me that when we have the opportunity to build new, we need to make the most of it and not squander it. When we are given these opportunities, we really need to make sure that we're able to pass on to the next generation, knowing that we made a positive impact to the planet. This was a view that we produced early on in illustrating the panoramic vistas of Lake Geneva and the Alps in the distance. And this was a view yesterday that we took on site as we're still in construction. These new collaborative environments that perhaps weren't possible from the historic building, however, are amongst the benefit when we have the opportunity to build new. We revisioned the UN workspace in hopes that it will further increase their productivity and ability to meet their global commitments by offering inspirational environments to work. Staying in Geneva for another project, I thought it would be good to expand on how we should be reevaluating the way we look at new buildings and how we will be able to kind of justify building new buildings in a European context. As our population continues to grow and cities become more dense, there will still be the need to build new buildings. In Geneva, there was a significant shortage in office buildings to meet the growing employment requirements, but there was limited areas to build within this historic setting. At the perimeter of the city center and along the foothills of the UN, we were able to repurpose an existing industrial land and remove the car park adjacent to a transportation node that was only one stop from the city center. The new headquarters building needed to fulfill many requirements that went beyond the competition jury. The city wanted to build a building that could accommodate new pedestrian routes for the growing district and allow to connect to the intermodal transportation link. We were able to allow for an entirely open public ground plane and be sensitive to the height restrictions for the area. It also provided us the headquarters to consolidate all of their estate and adopt new working practices. The diagram that's shown is to connect the public realm of the courtyard to the numerous amenities throughout the building and enhance their collaboration across departments. And by lifting the building up and allowing the employees, the visitors, and the community into the courtyard, it was able to connect them to the new pedestrian bridge leading in to that railway station. Inside the building, we encourage movement by the employees, be strategically placing stairs within the building and further enhancing this intercommunication and cross-collaboration. In accentuating the experience of moving through the building, not only through a great art program, but also by strategically locating a generous amount of amenities and collaboration spaces that encourages staff to move throughout the building. The sequence of these stairs culminate in arriving at these exceptional outdoor spaces, as well as these inspiring internal spaces. And what I find so rewarding and forward-thinking is the egalitarian distribution of program, where the best spaces benefit all staff. The last two images highlighted the most panoramic and the most generous spaces, and all the staff to use, not just a select few. In central Milan, we were asked to look at a series of buildings that originally were designed in the early 1960s by architects Gio Ponti and Piero Portaluppi as the Allianz headquarters. Gio Ponti, shown here in his showroom, was one of the great mid-modern designers, and we were compelled to reinstate the building's inherent qualities. It was a great opportunity to reinvigorate the Corso Italia area as a new workplace district for the city and helping further bolster Milan as one of the most vibrant metropolises in Europe. We were asked to take the historic insular single-tenant headquarters and help reinstate Gio Ponti's original design aspiration that could and would create a sense of connection with the city and within the buildings. Our goal was to help reestablish that new identity for the campus that had long been missing. The great thing about this project is that it was no longer reliant on the car that really dominated the campus buildings. The development now benefits by an extension of the metro, having a new stop right at their front door. And this really allowed us to revision both the ground level and the basement levels. From a car-dominated world to a completely pedestrianized environment, the sculpted outdoor spaces connect the campus together by reorientating the courtyard from the heart of the campus and promote health and well-being throughout. The once car park has now been revisioned and repurposed to interconnect all the buildings within the campus and a series of missing amenities and food hall provisions for their employees. We also needed to make careful, considered decisions on the degree of intervention we should make to each building. And this depended both on its heritage value and the specific role within its campus. And much like the car park, where there was a lot of easy wins for us, with such high sustainable targets, this allowed us for a much more efficient mechanical system that once occupied the roof as plant space. We were able to convert that over to occupier amenities, including office terraces and green spaces. And to overlook the Milan skyline is one of the great pleasures as any architect could have. These previously underutilized rooftops become amenity spaces, gardens, terraces, where everybody can enjoy the striking views across Milan. And what I have really tried to attempt to illustrate in this talk is that in all of the projects that I've presented is our drive as SOM to create a low carbon future. The challenges are going to be immense for us. And the road ahead is going to be very difficult. There are no straightforward answers, but we should meet these challenges head on as an opportunity to seek new answers. For architects, it should be a really great moment for us as it requires the creativity and the innovation that we need to be ready to answer these questions. We equally should understand that when we place a building on the planet, there are direct consequences. And we need to ensure that the building's contribution to be greater than it would be without. The decision to renovate or to build new should be evaluated against a multitude of criteria, and it's essential to provide holistic solutions that will continue to add value beyond the building's life. It's always easy to tell a story through a handful of projects, capturing the themes that we want to present today, but our work is going deeper than that. And I thought we would end on a video that would help illustrate SOM's commitment to fight climate change across multiple regions, project typologies, and aspects of the issues that we face together. Thank you again, Chloe. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Kent, for that brilliant presentation. Really so humbled to have personal insights from your background at the beginning, and also to hear about all the exciting and groundbreaking projects SOM are working on. We've got some questions here in advance from some of the audience for today's talk. So I'm going to just run straight through the questions.
Okay.
First question here. SOM Foundation has activities in America, China, and England for the development of architectural culture and skills. Would you consider doing some similar practices and collaborations with institutions and universities in Turkey? And how can we make it happen?
All right. Well, that, Chloe, is an excellent question. And I'm actually thankful you gave me the opportunity just to talk about the SOM Foundation. It was set up in 1979, and we then created a European UK prize in around 1986. But what's really interesting is that we've turned what was really a traveling fellowship into a research prize, which is promoting interdisciplinary activities between universities and allowing for more collaboration to take place. So yes, there's absolutely every intent that we want to widen this network. And we've had such a close relationship with the RIBA for our UK traveling fellowship. We look forward to rolling this out next year for this research prize that we're taking on so many interesting topics, a lot of which I probably addressed a little bit on the talk. And this idea of cross-collaborating, I think, becomes so important because these problems are so diverse in how we're going to look at planetary health. So there's kind of the overarching theme of planetary health as well as this idea of interdisciplinary collaboration. So we will be rolling this out in kind of a new format with the RIBA this year, and it will have a European focus, not a UK focus like it once had, but it also has the ability to collaborate with different universities from across the globe. So I guess as we're in that step with Turkey to be able to see that, I could see how potential cross collaborations could take place as we relaunch the research prize this year. So watch this space, I would say.
How exciting. Can't wait to see some of the projects that come out from the foundation over the next few
years. Yeah, I would give everybody the opportunity to look up on SOM Foundation, a separate website that's been relaunched as well. Talks about a lot of the research work that's been done in the last 2 years from our US prizes, and then we're rolling that out across the other prizes. We also have created the Robert Wesley Award for the BIPOC group that, again, has had so much interest in the States, and being able to put that together in such a short period of time has been a great work done by the foundation.
Thank you so much. So the next few questions are more about SOM and the projects. So the second question from our audience today is, SOM is focused on the challenges that cities will face in the future. What design or architectural elements do you think will be indispensable to us in the future?
Well, hopefully covered some of that ground on the talk, but I think, specifically when you can look at the district scale and create the kind of change that maybe the Denver project was showing, really looks at how that interdisciplinary approach can look at revitalizing key areas of a city and the way in which we can really think about planetary health at a much wider scale. But I think also just being the ability to kind of rethink how we've been looking at buildings. I think there's always been that looking to the future and kind of we change and rebuild and change and rebuild and change and rebuild, but really looking at the way in which we can keep the fabric that we currently have in place and establish it and rework it and be able to do much more. So I think it's, not that culture of just knocking down and rebuilding. I think it's the easiest answer, but it's clearly to really put the planet first, we're going to have to kind of stop that attitude and really think about how we can keep more of our existing buildings. And again, a lot of the infrastructure is going to change, but I think this creates such an exciting time for architects to be able to really be at the forefront of innovation and thinking about how we're putting our cities and our buildings together. So I think it's just a really great time. I'd like to think maybe it could have, just like the Renaissance, we could have this great moment in time where we can kind of take back control and be able to really show and give answers to the rest of the wider issues that are out there.
So much. So another question about how SOM, I guess, designs for the future, but in this case, how when you deliver your projects, how do you design with the future users of that project in mind?
Well, again, we'd always like to think that we do that, but I would say in this last, well, over a year now, that we've all been pent up in some form of lockdown and kind of working from afar and not with our colleagues. I think everyone has an opinion now, which I think is great. Everybody wants to talk about the built environment, where, whether it's their own apartment or the way in which they want to work in the future. So I think it's paramount to the discussion now that everyone has a voice. And I think with everyone having a voice, it's going to put this pressure point of really being able to make sure that we deliver projects that are meeting the needs of the users, where I think there was always that detachment from architect to the end user in one way or another, whether that be the resident that would occupy the home, or if that was the tenant that would be in the office space, that you didn't have that one-to-one relationship. I think now it's going to be so much more that we need to have that dialogue with the end users. It's not really someone else interpreting it for you, what that might be. So I think that is going to naturally do that. I think internally, we have a great way of really being connected across the globe, so we can see trends that exist anywhere in the world and really try to have that in different types of analysis that we can go through, and we talk from office to office and look at those trends that are happening. So I think that also gives us a little bit of insight of whether it has maybe taken place in one location, but maybe influencing the interesting ideas or the way in which the users are going to be kind of modifying or changing the way in which they want to occupy an office building or go to a library or a university, and looking at different ways those trends take place. So I think that's the advantage of, again, working for a interdisciplinary practice like SOM, is having that great catalog of projects and the way in which we analyze them and are able to kind of refine our craft after each project.
And so we have one last question here from our audiences today. At SOM, architects and designers are working on projects from all around the globe. How do your processes and designs take into account the local cultures in which the projects will take place?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really look at those kind of Middle East projects that I showed with the Hajj terminal and the National Commerce Bank in Jeddah. And, those were very bold projects. I think they were very modern projects as well. But we've always had this benefit, especially here in London, that we, I think it's there's a different language spoken every 3 staff that we have in the office. And I guess that kind of shows the melting pot that you get in London of these great, rich, diverse cultures. I think that also would be on display with all of our offices in the way in which we just have quite a wide diversity. So we do try to match that when we do work in those locations. Generally, most of the offices, are part of that city or that location. But again, we're working in other areas across the globe that we wouldn't have an office or have that blend of cultures. But probably someone within the office, again, has that knowledge. And we now are so focused on this collaboration of interdisciplinary work that we kind of mix and match. We don't all have to be from the same office anymore. So again, if we have someone from Pakistan and we're looking at a project there, we would actually look for them to kind of help shape that project and make sure that we understand those nuances in that culture, that society. So again, I think that's with the size that we are, it gives that kind of richness, and I think also checks and balances to make sure that we're focused on the right things when we do go into a building. I think the idea of having a certain amount of permanence that needs to be established, but I'd also say there's that regionalism that needs to be aware. So I think that's so important now when we talk about climate change and being able to really understand that if you go to visit a site, but you visit it at the wrong time of the year, you may not really understand the pressures of what a certain society might go through, whether it be a monsoon season or if it becomes the extreme temperatures that climate might have. So again, it's having that ability of that knowledge that's kind of built in. And again, fortunately, we've been able to build many different places across the globe. So there is kind of, again, quite a good series of data that we've developed over time, but we would still, I think, rely on our individual employees that would have that relationship. And also, I think collaboration just doesn't stop within the walls of SOM. I think the collaboration of working with local artisans or local architects and designers is really important as well. And they also give that insight. So again, you know, any idea is a good idea, really. So taking that with our consultants, I think, is equally important to be able to influence the project and making sure that we are building something that will be timeless in that location.
Thank you. Well, we've had some great questions sent through, so thank you so much to everyone who submitted them. Before we end, Kent, do you have anything you want to say to anyone in the audience?
Well, I mean, I think it's just been a very difficult time for everybody, the last 12 to 18 months of what everybody has been through. But I do show hope that it's hopefully opened everybody's eyes, not just maybe the design community, but we really, hopefully we'll come out of this and we'll have learned so much more about how we will be able to address the issues that face us. And so although it does sometimes feel like it's, doesn't have the greatest outlook when we think about all the pressures that are coming and facing the planet and the pandemic that is out there. I actually think that this is a moment of discovery, and I do hope that everybody will take the opportunity to think about how we come out of this wiser and you know, maybe more tolerant as well, and thinking about how we can implement that into the work that we do.
Wow, absolutely. How inspiring. Thank you so much for those optimistic words. I think that's a brilliant note to end on. Thank you so much again for your lecture today and your time. We're so grateful to have you here as part of the RIBA Istanbul strand. And thank you all for joining us. And see you soon. Bye.